Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, whatever it is in your part of the world. I hope the sun is shining. Welcome to Greenheart's B Corp Month panel discussion. We'll just allow a few minutes for people to trickle in. And in the meantime, please do introduce yourselves in the chat. Great. Well, I think we will get moving. Apologies again that we have. Oh, no, it's working. It's working. Good, good. Knew it would be. Welcome again. Thank you for joining Greenheart's B Corp Month panel discussion. Happy B Corp Month. My name is Thomas Bourne. I am the founder of Greenheart, and I have been a proud member of the B Corp community for nearly 10 years now. And we have got a fantastic lineup for you today. I had the idea of this session when I realized that the evolution of the B Corp standards was all I'd really heard people talking about for the last couple of years. And it felt to me, as somebody, very much in love with this movement, that we'd lost sight of what really got me into B Corp in the first place, which is the community, the global movement of visionary businesses with a shared vision for the future. And felt to me like never has rallying around that vision been so relevant. So the next hour is all about that. It's all about what the B signaled in 2026, the leadership, the collective responsibility, the courage to act together when political leadership on climate and inequality feels, if I'm being generous, fragile. Before I introduce our brilliant panelists, just a couple of housekeeping notes. The session today is scheduled to run for 60 minutes, so we will close out at the top of the next hour. We will share the recording afterwards with everyone who registered. So if you do have to dash off, not the end of the world, you will still be able to catch up. Please do use the Q&A panel rather than the chat to send in questions, and we will take those at around the 40-minute mark. And finally, this is a conversation. This is a human conversation. We are very deliberately not having any slides because we want to let it flow. So with that, let me introduce our fabulous panelists. And rather than a full comprehensive CV readout, I'm going to give each one a very quick introduction and then ask them to start with a simple reflection. I'm going to ask them, what does being part of the B Corp movement mean to you right now in 2026? So first up, I'm going to go to you, Sarah Schwimmer, who is co-lead executive at B Lab Global, very much at the forefront of helping steward the global B Corp movement. Over to you. What does the movement mean to you in this time, Sarah?
Yeah, thanks, Tom. And really great to be here with all of you. So as I mentioned, I'm Sarah. I'm calling in from Washington, D.C., which is where I live. I want to just really quickly share a quick personal history because I think it's relevant to your question. I am the product of immigrants, and my family has a long history in this country of organizing, particularly around labor, for safer labor practices. And I want to share that because while that's very different from the conversation we're having today and very different from the rationale for why B Corps exist, for me, it is foundational and formational in my understanding of the power of collective action when power is unequally distributed, the opportunity that exists when we do build a wide tent movement that is based on shared values. So that's kind of why I came to B Lab 5 years ago. For me, what B Lab and B Corps mean in this movement, it means action, it means moral courage, and it means community. It means recognizing that the way that the economy works right now is not the weather, it's not natural law, it's because of design choices. And being in this community means we recognize that we have the opportunity and perhaps even obligation to design a different way of doing business that works for more of us.
Brilliant. Thank you. I love that. The way the economy works is because of design choices. Brilliant. Jessie McNeil-Brown, head of social mission Europe at Ben& Jerry's, spends her life embedding human rights and social impact into business. What does being around the B Corp movement mean to you right now, Jessie?
Thank you, Tom, and thank you everyone for joining today, and thanks for having me. So Ben and Jerry's, we joined B Corp quite early, and because we saw B Corp as a movement, and we wanted our co-founders, as everyone hopefully is aware, are very passionate about business being a force for good and doing business differently. So where I sit with B Corp, this isn't just about certification. It's not just about having a label. This is about conscious, committed decisions as to how you run your business, how you manage your business, and how you want to do that and how you want to use that to contribute to positive social impact and to build the world that we want to see around us. At the moment, and I might speak about this as we go through the panel, with all the pressure that we're feeling and the changes in the world, I think it's really important that we do this as a collective. So, as Sarah mentioned, that this is a collective. And we know now that one person, one organization, it's going to be so much harder to create change. So we really do need to turn up and show up together. We're also under incredible economic challenges. And for me, being part of that B Corp movement gives us that extra credibility and support to really prove the business case for why doing business in a good way is also a profitable business decision as well. But for me, it's really about consistency, committed decisions, and a collective.
Brilliant. Thank you, Jesse. And apologies to anyone who is hungry on this call. I can vouch that I'm in the same boat, but that particular flavor behind Jesse is amongst the best. So don't miss out. Last, but by absolutely no means least, Kate Ogden is head of advocacy and movement building at Seventh Generation. Has been involved in corporate advocacy for many years. Lobbying or advocating for systemic climate and social change. Kate, tell me about your feelings about the B Corp movement right now.
Thank you. Yeah. Well, let me echo folks' thanks to Greenheart for putting this panel together, but also to Jesse and Sarah, who have just been incredible fellow panelists to have a chance to get to know through the preparation for this, and very challenging to follow in terms of answering this question because I just couldn't, I was like really nodding my head. I was like, yes, all of this. And then thinking about how am I going to say that, but a little bit differently. Um, as background, before my time at Seventh Generation, I worked at Greenpeace USA for 12 years. I started working at Greenpeace when I was 24. And so I really sort of came up in many ways, I feel like I sort of grew up as an activist and an advocate within an organization that is one of the premier corporate campaigning organizations in the world. So I think that I grew up in this movement with a very specific power analysis around the roles that corporations play in either obstructing or accelerating the type of progress and the type of systemic change that I want to see in the world. I think that on balance, historically, corporations have been a source of harm. And I think that it is also an incredibly important power to harness to understand that the power and I think you have to accept the mantle of responsibility as business leaders that corporations have an outsized and an inappropriate, frankly, amount of power and influence over our political system. But that's true. And we can only build the world as we want it to be within the world as it is right now. So how do we accept that mantle of responsibility and think about how we leverage the influence that we all have as business leaders for the type of positive systemic change that we want to see? And I think for me, this moment in particular within the B Corp movement is about accepting that individual mantle of responsibility and also understanding that this work is incredibly difficult and it gets easier as more people step into it. And so again, I'll echo the theme of collective action here, but I think that to me feels like the crux of the power of the B Corp movement right now is not just what it stands for and all of the incredible individuals who are within it, but it is the collective power of those principles and those people working together.
Brilliant. Thank you, Kate. And I'm going to stick with you if I may, because I mean, it's been great hearing everyone's kind of backstories and kind of weigh in. And I particularly like the transition that you've been through and the recognition that, corporates on balance have been, a source of harm, therefore we need to step into this responsibility. But as you've been involved in B Corp and on the corporate side, how have you seen? I mean, clearly we've seen the standards themselves change, but we've seen the context change hugely, certainly over the last 10 years that I've been involved. So how do you think the meaning and the expectations on B Corp specifically have changed in that time?
Yeah, I mean, I have now been, I think this is my eighth year at Seventh Generation, which is also my eighth year in the corporate sector. My entire career prior to that had been in the NGO space. Like Ben and Jerry's, Seventh Generation was a founding B Corp. We've been a B Corp for a long time, B Corp long before I was at the company. And if I'm honest, I think when I started at the company back in 2018, I think that our B Corp status was something that I a little bit took for granted. It was like we had been a B Corp for a long time. We had been a best in the world B Corp multiple times. And so while it was something that I was aware of, I think that I felt, you know, I think I thought of it as something that was really about our direct impact on people on the planet, whereas my work kind of sat over here, which is how do we leverage our influence to drive systemic change. The external context has changed dramatically in that time, and I think also B Corp has really changed in that time. And that sort of co-evolution of where we are, for me, has meant that in this moment, I really see B Corp as an anchor for our whole organization, as something that we can look at and say, if we want this to be an indelible part of who Seventh Generation is, how are we road mapping what our next 3, 5, 10 years looks like, particularly within the context of the new standards. But also I think that B Corp has become, for me, a invaluable partner in building strong collective action coalitions for climate policy at the state level, at the federal level. And so it has become really a critical component to the work that I have the privilege of doing at Seventh Generation. And then I think on a personal level, and I've already talked to this a little bit, I think that these are the moments when when things can feel challenging. It is maybe a little bit of the human condition to kind of like turn inward. And I think that what B Corp has come to represent to me is the imperative to actually turn to each other in this moment, and the strength that we can find, the courage that we can find when we are standing with others. So I think those are the three things that feel like they've really evolved over the time that I've been at Seventh Generation.
Great. And I mean, feel free, anyone else, to sort of jump in on this question. But Sarah, I mean, you and I, when we met at Climate Week, we had a lovely conversation. I remember about how this is the moment that B Corp was born for, really. And I guess you've got two perspectives on this, because you've got, you are that critical partner, you are the community conveners, but also you're speaking to B Corps, to certified B Corps. You're speaking to businesses every day. So yeah, interested to hear from those two perspectives. How do you see that the meaning, the expectation change as the context has evolved?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think, yeah, just to kind of reiterate what you just shared and to build, Kate, on what you were sharing, I absolutely believe that this moment we're in, and it looks different depending on where you are in the world, but what we are seeing is a general sort of trend where it is becoming harder, in some cases structurally or politically harder to behave as a B Corp. And I think that is exactly why this movement was founded. I'm not going to tell a whole history lesson here, but I do think this is a very American-centered example. But just to name, around the turn of the century in the United States, there was incredible wealth inequality, incredible erosion of the very few democratic norms that existed, which at that time were primarily only for white men. So just to be, honest about where that was. And there was this incredible sort of groundswell of collective action that was showing up in the labor movement, in certain political spaces, and in some corporate spaces. And what we saw in that moment was an incredible boomerang, where within a decade, there was an incredible shift, where there was an expansion of voting rights access. There was an expansion in labor protections in wage, commitments. There was a reduction in monopolies, as an example. And I just want to name that because for two reasons. One, that didn't just happen, right? That was because individuals made choices and took certain behaviors, and they found like-minded, shared, aligned values, folks, to organize around that. And the other reason that I think that's important is that we need to understand where we are in this moment in a much longer sort of historical context. This is a relay race, right? Like, I think everyone knows this, that probably none of us will still be walking this planet when we've won, right? This is a challenge and a sort of a design flaw that we need to be combating and evolving well into children, grandchildren, et cetera. And so we need to understand ourselves in that the moment that we're in right now and not be naive or Pollyanna-ish about it. And also, I think take real courage and on my best days, excitement about this opportunity. Because what we have seen historically in that one example I shared, but there are countless others throughout history and around the world where it is when you are seeing that sort of backsliding, when it could continue, that could, we'll see how this goes. But it is when we have seen that backsliding where we have also seen the most incredible gains. And so for me, obviously the B Corp movement is not going to solve every problem that, exists on this planet. And also it is an incredible, important tool for proving that a different way of doing business is possible. And I think to your point, Kate, we need to accept the reality we're in, which is that corporations do have probably outsized influence. We also know that consistently corporations as a sector are more trusted than civil society, than the nonprofit sector. And so it is an opportunity. This is the right lever for us to be, pulling and activating to bring about that change. Here in the United States, capital talks, right? That is the only sector that the current federal administration might listen to. And so I think here, we have an even bigger, opportunity. And then the last thing I would just say, just on the B Corp standards themselves, as you all know, I'm sure you all know, we are now certifying companies on the new standards. And these are in some ways harder, more challenging, much more comprehensive, rigorous standards. And that is intentional because the origin of this movement is about demonstrating proof of concept and then being able to replicate it and to be able to prove that this way of doing business is not only possible, but that continuous improvement is also possible. And so just a call for those of you who are running B Corps or work at B Corps, this is the moment that we actually need you more than ever. And so we can talk at a different date about the support that B Lab as an organization is working to provide to companies. But we need companies to come along with us in this moment to prove that even as things get hard in the broader sort of macro context, and even as the standards become in some cases more rigorous, companies and the people making choices who run these companies are in it. That gives us an incredible platform and a larger voice that we can be amplifying for the structural changes that we all need to see.
I love those reflections because it's always struck me that it's in these moments of political vacuum when movements like this really kind of come into their own. And I think what I hadn't really thought about until you really started talking about it is like this. The economy works this way because it's designed this way, but looking at it in that continuum. I heard a wonderful podcast with Frederick Laloux the other day where he was talking about every moment, every real moment of kind of historic change in human history has been started with a moment like this, like where everything's messy and everything's confusing and things are uncomfortable. And so we have to live through it. It's what we are unfortunately here to do, is like live through it and shepherd it. But we are the leaders of it. I'd love to come on, Jesse, to a kind of question about, I think, visibility. Corporate visibility is, I think, where I'd like to just kind of tease out next, because amidst all of these dynamics that we're talking about, where clearly we've got a lot of scrutiny on public institutions, particularly sort of federal institutions, the behaviors of large corporations are also more visible, more consequential. How does this shape the role you think B Corp leaders should be playing?
Yeah, I really recognize this moment. We've got political leadership on climate and inequality that's feeling really fragile, and we've spoken about that vacuum that it's created. And in that vacuum, business behavior becomes more visible. And Sarah mentioned the things like the Edelman Trust Barometer that's showing that since COVID, I think we've been seeing that decline in trust for governments, for media, and the trust in business growing. So it's at this moment we need to be really careful about what we say, what we fund, what we normalize. And I've been thinking about this through that lens of trust. This is what makes our business leadership so important, and it makes credible leadership even more valuable, because the question for us isn't whether we have influence, it's how we use it. And this is something that we ask ourselves almost on a daily basis at Ben & Jerry's. If we're looking at an activity or a commitment, particularly around our activism and using our voice, the first thing we ask ourselves is, are we going to add clarity, or are we just going to add to the noise? Like, what's our role in this moment? Can we create stability or some consistency, or is this just focusing on something that's more short term? And is there real value in that? And how do we add that value? And is there a shared benefit with those that we're working with at this moment? I feel like we have three responsibilities at the moment. And one, we've all talked about how we feel things are regressing, how under threat we feel everything is. With our work, particularly around human rights and refugees at the moment, for us, people always say, what does good look like? Holding the line. And I think that's something that we as B Corps, let's not put too much pressure on ourselves right now. Let's just try to hold the line about what good looks like, because things are so fragile. That temptation to soften our commitments, to lower our expectations, particularly what we're asking our businesses internally, or even to go quiet. Let's hold that line. And with B Corps, we should continue to be disciplined, transparent, evidence-led. And that's as much for the people inside our organizations as outside of our businesses as well. And we need to remember about that leadership both in our organizations and outside during these times of immense pressure. Because we need people to see the difference between values and when you're being performative. The second responsibility I see, and this we really consider really important at Ben & Jerry's, is to use a collective voice. As I mentioned before, you don't want to be a lone voice. This is the time for collective action. So we always speak with people who have expertise or are on the front lines with the lived experience, because when you turn up as a movement, it's harder to dismiss that, whether you're in front of a government or maybe you're in front of your C-suite trying to get more budget. Go with cross-functional teams as well. And that's where we also have the power right now. Let's align around our non-negotiables on human rights, on climate, on inequality. And Sarah, I have to say that's what I love about the new standards, is that commitment around human rights and inequality is stronger, and it's expected for everyone. And we can't just be specialists in climate. We need to be across the board as well. And then just quickly, I'll just say the third responsibility I see is we need to be useful to people. We need to be useful to each other, to our movement. And we've just done some research ourselves on our fans. That's what we call our customers at Ben & Jerry's. And we found that in our biggest markets, our fans who understood our social mission are the ones who are more active, and they're increasingly wanting us to turn up and to show them how to get involved. And that, especially for us as an activism team, gives us a lot of license. So there's an opportunity, but also a responsibility to help our customers, to help our team members, to turn that concern into meaningful action and to show them that leadership on how to do that. So we've got a lot of permission at the moment to show up with our leadership, but also action and to show true leadership as well. I'm not saying it's easy. We need to look to each other for that support during the hard times, and that's where the collective piece I think really comes in.
There's so much we can unpack there, and I'm loving the little sound bites that we're coming out with, like hold the line on what good looks like. I think that's going to be one of them for me. But I think this point you make about like we need to be useful. Like, is there value shared benefit in how we're showing up and talking? Because I think that kind of mindful approach to how businesses show up, as opposed to the kind of, yeah, the performative elements, or this is my brand, therefore here is what I'm going to say. Um, Having that kind of more mindful thought through what is going to be of most value shared benefit in this moment seems critical. I mean, Kate, how do you bring that into your work? How do you sort of grapple with that every day?
Actually, I'll jump on that, but I wanted to build onto one thing about what Jesse was saying on this last one, if that's okay.
Of course.
Yeah. Okay, great. Just thinking about this question of, how do we need business leaders to show up in this moment, or how should we sort of be prioritizing that? And I think, in addition to my role at Seventh Gen, I also work with a great organization in my home state of Vermont called Vermont Businesses for Social Responsibility. And one of the things I think I'm seeing in a lot of places is that this may be particularly relevant in the US context, but democracy is good for business. And that I think is it's like a talking point, something that you can throw out there. But I right now, like if I like my like mission on this call and in my work with VBSR is like I really want to support business leaders to be fluent in expressing specifically why strong democratic norms are important for their business to be successful. And I name that because I think that we all sort of lived through a moment, and I think, Jesse, you spoke to this so well, but I think the line between having, principles and values and leading from that place and maybe performative activism, I think got really messy sometime in, the sort of 2020, 2023 frame. And it's hard to unpack the messy salad of, how do we find ourselves in the moment that we're living in right now? But I think all of that is in the mix of it. It is true. There is a business case. There's a very meaningful business case for strong democratic norms. And I think whether that is because you need your business to be staffed because like you actually, having, immigrant labor is a critical part of your business model. And so you need people available because the raw ingredients or the products that you need are unavailable to you because of tariffs, whatever that thing is. I think really being able to speak to it fluently and with confidence is sort of my call to business leaders anywhere where there is sort of pressure right now on democratic norms, because again, we do have that voice and that influence and a level of trust from the general public. I think being able to move past kind of a like, I support this from a place of principle to like, this is actually critical to my success as an entrepreneur, as a business leader, is something that is so important right now.
Yeah. Yeah,
I
that's
love that. Can I just jump? Sorry, I'm
please.
so like, I love that, Kate. And my neck hurts from nodding my head so aggressively just now. Democracy is good for business, absolutely. And I also just want to say, for those of us on this call and I see there are a lot of thumbs up in the chat so B Corp founders, a lot of folks here. This question, I think that you're asking us around purpose, like real purpose versus PR, essentially. If you are a certified B Corp, you are required to embed stakeholder governance and other things into the way that you practice your business. So you are behaving in a certain way. And I just want to name that I do think that especially in moments where it can feel overwhelming, where there's one dominant narrative that we're regressing my call for all of us on this call is to not give up our power. Recognize the agency that each of us have, and especially those of you who are B Corp leaders, have. You are behaving in a certain way that is a counter narrative to what has become the sort of dominant narrative of what business looks like. Know that. Do not be shy about that. That doesn't mean you need to put out a press release on everything that ever happens because that would be your full-time job, right? But understand and do not give up the power and the agency that comes with making choices to run your business in this way. And so I just really appreciate, Jesse, what you were sharing on how Ben and Jerry's the lens that y'all look at through that. And Kate, yeah, democracy is good for business. Predictability is good for business. And of course, I imagine all of us on this call believe that humans should have certain, inalienable rights, et cetera. But there's a pretty core business case for predictability and democratic norms being protected.
I'm going to take this to a really literal call out. You've got the midterms coming up in the US. In the UK, we've got elections coming up. Our voter turnout for local elections, particularly for young people, is so alarming. So one thing that everyone who's listening into this call can do, we've got loads of local elections happening in Europe as well at the moment, is make sure your teams know how to register to vote and are getting out to vote. It is so critical this year that everyone gets out to vote. And local elections, if we see with the election of Mamdani in New York and not the power, but the influence and the roles that local mayors are playing now. Just this past weekend, we've seen the first openly gay mayor elected into a very conservative state in Germany. And that is going to be so critical as well for progress in Germany. So please make sure everyone is voting in your organization this year.
Yeah, and I think that's such an important point because we are seeing at a subnational level, like some of the trends being bucked, and we saw that in the UK with the election of the Green MP recently against, I think slightly to some people's surprises, particularly their competitors. But what is going on at subnational level is one of the things that should feed that hope and excitement and the kind of redrawing of the narrative, if you like. So these are all brilliant points. Thank you so much for making them. We've talked. We've talked a few times. We've touched on a few times about trust and perceived trust. And I think what always strikes me about trust is that it's very hard won and very easily lost. And the sort of the ability of the public to trust businesses hasn't been a kind of one way upward line. So there's no doubt that however you dress it up, we've got increasing scrutiny, particularly on purpose-led businesses. We've got at a regulatory level, we've got tightening of greenwashing regulations. At a B Corp level, we've got the increased the bar being raised in the standards. And this is all good, I think. The skepticism that we see in the media, some of it's not positive, but some of it actually we should be taking on board. So how do we, as businesses, as a movement, hold our credibility without being tempted to fall into defensiveness or overclaiming? How do we hold the line? Is, I guess, my question. Jesse, you are the hold the line originator. So can I come back to you?
Um, do you know what? When you say all of that, the first thing I just want to point out is this is what they come for. They're going to come for us. I've been looking at the pillars that support authoritarianism, and I know I'm going really heavy into topics right now, but we can't shy away from this is the world that we're in right now, whether you're in Europe, whether you're in the US, whether you're in the UK, and business is a pillar of support for authoritarianism, along with media and other political parties and so on. But for us as businesses that stand for something that will challenge these authoritarian powers over what they're trying to do, how they're trying to roll back human rights, how they're trying to roll back on climate commitments, they're going to come for us. They're going to try to create that, accusations. No, you're not really all that. So the first thing I would just say is when you're hearing that criticism, when your doubt is creeping in, that's what they want. And that's what they want on all the values that we hold dear right now. So we can't let that win. And always, always, always just have that cynicism of, well, where is this really coming from? Who really benefits from us turning on each other in B Corp or saying this business doesn't deserve to be in B Corp, or is B Corp really fit for purpose? This is a moment more than ever. We need to rally around each other, support each other, and use all the resources that we have, pool our resources, share our data, our learnings, our expertise to make sure that we continue to advance and get better and prove that business case and show the great leadership of businesses that are committed to everything that B Corp stands for.
Yeah, fantastic. Anyway, I'm keen to give everyone else an opportunity to breathe on this question. Sarah, go on.
Um, yeah, I really appreciate that, Jesse. And I think from the B Lab perspective, well, first, just to echo, criticism at this stage is, again, sort of to be expected. We're making progress. Look at where the criticism is coming from in most cases. That said, I do think that there is very valid criticism of the B Corp movement, of some B Corps that are in the movement, questions on how and why, even criticism on the new standards. And I think that from the B Lab perspective, we need to continue to have sort of a culture and identity around sort of stakeholder engagement and very inclusive sort of conversations and make space for that. To continue to have humility that, the B Corp standards are not perfect. And as I said, this is about progress, being able to measure and hold ourselves accountable to that progress, but not to in any way claim perfection. And then the third piece is that this is really, I think, calling into the conversation, the reality that the B Lab movement has been intentionally designed to be as large and inclusive a tent as possible, with understanding that we have very rigorous, health of business standards that if you are a B Corp, you have met. And so I think there's always going to be tension within this movement. And frankly, all good, successful movements do have that tension and accept and wrestle with it because it will make us stronger. And so I think, there's a space. I absolutely agree, Jesse. Look at where is the criticism coming from? And maybe we need to continue to have the nuance and the humility to parse what is legitimate and coming from sort of those of us who are invested in wanting to continue to do better and be able to prove this concept even more strongly, and what is a distraction. Because we are knocking at the doors of power, and you're always going to be, getting an answer when you get too close, and that's the moment I think we're in now.
Yeah, yeah, and I think that engaged tension. I agree. I'd go as far as to say like any organization needs tension, needs positive tension, engaged tension in order to evolve, in order to keep it going. And how wonderful. I think I've always felt one of the strengths of B Corp is the simplicity and clarity of its message is so easy for people to get behind and to say, right, okay, look, yeah, we don't agree with everything, but we really want this to succeed. We really want to achieve this. Therefore, let's keep that tension kind of in play. But as you say, it's the why. It's the sort of what are people really looking to benefit from? So I'm going to take a couple of questions, if I may, from the audience. We've got some brilliant questions coming in. The first one, which doesn't have a name assigned, but that's okay. How can a business go about identifying the issue that they can lead on or center their collective actions on if they feel that there is no natural sustainability topic that they have special expertise in? Who'd like to pick that one up?
I'll jump in. I gave a whole training on this at the last Champions Retreat. So let me know if you want that deck. I because of the role that I played at 7Gen and because I have the great privilege of organizing a lot of other businesses along with us, I think one of the things that I hear so often from folks is that they don't have, this is not something that's an established process for them. They don't necessarily know, like, these are the issues that we advocate on. And the example I always give is it's, very common sort of tactic around policy work is, a sign-on letter. This list of businesses all would really like to see this piece of policy move forward. And a lot of the businesses that I talk to are like, well, I don't even know who I would ask for approval on this. So they, all of the kind of functional responsibilities and structures that a lot of businesses might have often don't exist around topics like advocacy. And the first thing that I always recommend with folks is that they take some time to reflect. Many businesses might have a mission statement. You might have at some point written down, these are our values, these are the things they care about. It might be internal facing, right? It might be about the way that we're going to work with each other. They might not be written down. They might just sort of be understood in the organizational culture. And so I always recommend that folks interrogate that a little bit. What do you actually care about as a business and as a group of individuals? And then what might that suggest to you? So if one of the things that you really care about in the way that you work with each other is radical transparency, then that might open up some issue area topics around things that you might say, we actually want to develop a policy platform around this. Or maybe we just want to start investigating like what policies might exist or might be starting to move in our jurisdiction, wherever we are, that we might have a point of view on. So I say really start with that internal work of trying to understand what are your explicit or implicit values as a business or as a group of people, and then start from there to see what does that suggest. It doesn't have to be a sustainability topic. It doesn't have to have anything to do with the thing that you make or the service that you provide. It could really be based on a value that is held dear to you all about the way that you think we ought to function in the world, the way that we interact with our environment, the way that we interact with each other, the way that we interact with our communities, and start there.
Brilliant. Does anyone else want to pick up? I mean, I guess the other great thing that I love about the new standards particularly is how they kind of almost promote this inquiry. Particularly if you are a larger business, you're encouraged to, or you're required to do a materiality assessment, and you're required to develop your purpose statement. So all of this is kind of feeding an answer to that question, right? But I like that kind of what's the intrinsic, what are you here for? Another very juicy question I'd love to pick up. This may be one for you, Jesse. I love the idea of pushing back once they come for us, but something I've heard in the community is how many don't have the resources if that were to happen. What would you say to a small B Corp that is worried about getting wrapped up in any legal trouble?
Yeah, I really feel this one. I hear this one. First, this was something I wanted to talk about in terms of the role that we can play right now. I've heard it from my team this morning, particularly the smaller groups, the grassroots groups, if I think about the refugee space or the human rights space, they have lost so much funding, and funding is at such a critical level. They can no longer focus on their advocacy work. They're all doubling down on service provision, and they have such acute needs to deliver to the people that they serve. That's where we feel we play a role a lot of the time, or when we decide to speak up on an issue, it's because people in the movement are under-resourced. They don't have the time or the people to deal with the trolling on social media, for example, if they get backlash. So we do find ourselves more and more saying we've got to say something because everyone's so busy delivering services and they just don't have that ability to do that. So for the bigger organizations, and it's a call out to everyone here, really consider that leadership and that role that we can play as B Corps at the moment, when grassroots groups and those groups working with the most impacted by some of the most serious issues just can't do that right now. If you're a smaller B Corp and you have concerns, and particularly here in the EU with the new political advertising rules that everyone's trying to get their heads around in the EU, and who doesn't love, it is challenging. I would just look at what can you do? Like, it doesn't always have to be like what Ben and Jerry's does, and we go out and we say something and we try to be bold. Sometimes, and we also speak to our team about this, maybe it's just finding a bit of extra cash and taking that to an organization that you care about and you care about their cause. I saw in the Q&A that there were some people asking about reproductive rights. You don't have to go out and take an ad out in a public newspaper. $2,000, $5,000 to an organization that is trying to campaign for these rights, that at the moment would go a long way. Or having a volunteer day so that your social media experts or your accounts person or someone with qualified like expertise that that organization could really benefit and from when there is such a resource limitation at the moment could go a long way as well. Sometimes I think just showing up with ice cream to an office of an organization that we know is really up against it. They're really, to you, it might seem really simple and small, but to others, it might go a long way. So there's lots of things you can do without having to really put your organization on the line like that.
And just for the record, Jesse, showing up with ice cream always goes a long way. With
It's
me,
just it melts, Tom. It's so hard to keep it frozen a lot of the time. It's our
there
biggest challenge is moving ice cream around in our business, I'm going to say, but yeah.
there is nothing not to like about that. This is great. We've got so many fantastic questions coming through. I mean, guys, please, if there's one that you're burning to answer as or follow on from one of these comments, please do. Otherwise, I will keep going. The next one, Sarah, might be quite good for you to pick up. From Alistair, how can B Corp be the balanced middle ground that treads the fine line between politicization of cause, which in today's world is polarizing, with change for good? I ask because and this is a newly certified B Corp. I ask because that's the fine line we're trying to tread.
Yeah. Easy question. Thanks for that. No, I think this is incredibly important. And I do want to say maybe a couple things. We need to continue to interrogate and understand the difference between politics and values. Obviously, there is a lot of overlap, but anything can and has become quote unquote politicized, right? Um, the B Corp standard and this movement developed in recognition that the way that capitalism has evolved has been to support and preference a select number of people at the expense of most of the rest of us. And so I do think that there is a foundational sort of divergence there. If you are a part of this movement and you believe that there is a different way of doing business, of practicing capitalism, then that is in some contexts a political statement. And I don't think we need to shy away from that. But I do think that there is, an opportunity for us to use Jesse's language to sort of hold the line, to offer ourselves as a counter narrative. I think the chest beating, I don't think it's needed. I think we can be showing up in different places. And there was a question here, I think, around, kind of asking for Kate to kind of explain more on sort of the connection between good business and sort of democratic norms. And to me, this is very connected. When we are I guess what I would say is that we need to continue to interrogate and think about, are we taking the bait? What is the platform? What is the foundation in which we will be having certain conversations? If there is a prevailing narrative that has evolved, and that if that narrative becomes the mainstream, that anything is political, that saying that, abducting someone from their home who has committed no crime is somehow a political, thing, then we have lost, if I can be very direct. And so I think that there's an opportunity that the B Corp movement has, because it is inclusive, because it is diverse, because it is over 10,000 certified B Corps around the world, with hundreds of thousands who have tried, as along the way, over 100 countries, over 100 industries, over 1 million people employed at B Corps around the world. We have something to say here. And what we have to say is that we believe in these certain values, and we will not allow them to become politicized. So I do think that, frankly, that there's a lot more work that B Lab can be doing and has aspirations to do as we go through our own sort of transition with the new standards and focusing on that, to support B Corps more and to be maybe making space for different sorts of conversations that companies can have, where it's not about, a B Corp is a political act. Becoming a B Corp is a values-driven act. And so I just want to say, I think we have to keep that in mind. That's very, meta, not very maybe tactically operational, Alistair, but I hope that framing makes sense and is helpful.
I think that's no, I think that's such a good point because I think it's easy to sort of lose sight of the fact that not every issue that we want to call out is political. Sometimes they are, sometimes we see things that are just outrageous at a basic human level. And we are sadly seeing it every single day. That is not a matter of politics. It is just
Mhm,
it
mhm.
just is what it is. And so the fact that we can call it out in community with each other's backs and support, I think is deeply, deeply powerful. We have time for one more. There is loads of questions. They're all fantastic, and I'm very sad we won't be able to get to them all, but we'll come back to you offline if we can. Final one I want to pitch in is around tension, and we're going to have like super quick response to this. Tension trade-offs. As a leader, how do you navigate the tension between commercial interests and advocating for policy change that may be necessary for long-term societal good? What are the blockers you've experienced and how have you overcome them? Particularly in a commercial context, I guess this is something we come up against the whole time. So Jesse or Kate, do you want to pick that up super quick?
I feel like I've done loads of talking. So, Kate, if you want to jump in there, or I can jump in.
Yeah, I mean, in so many ways, I think that this is capturing it's, I think we're just living in a moment of short-term thinking on just about every level. And I think we're feeling that in our businesses. And so, um, yes, that tension exists. Yes, we are feeling that at seventh generation. I think we can all nod heads on that we're probably all feeling that in our context. I think it's so important. And I think that the role that we can play as business leaders is remembering ourselves and working to get our colleagues to lift their heads up and see the horizon because yes, it is more expensive to source an ingredient from this more sustainable supply chain than this less sustainable supply chain. And in the short term, that is hard. In the long term, you cannot have a healthy business on a sick planet. So, you know, at some point, right, all of these bills are going to come due eventually. And so the role that we can play to lift our heads up and see the horizon, we're not going to win all those fights. And I think we're all feeling that right now. We're probably losing a lot more of them than we're winning, but you got to keep fighting them. You've got to keep reminding people to lift their head up and see the horizon because eventually those clouds are going to clear a little bit. Doesn't matter what happens in this election, the next election, these bills are coming due on all of these issues. So eventually that change is inevitable. And the question is, can we move a little bit faster?
I would also just add to that, bring your team with you as much and as often as you can. So in whatever way, and just be shameless in it, in reminding everyone in your organization, this kind of change takes a long time. We're not seeing policy changes happen overnight, or unfortunately, the ones like on refugee rights are happening overnight and being trying to be pushed really quickly. But on the whole, most things do take a long time. So when you are advocating for policy change, you need to help the team understand we could be at this for a while because it may not come quickly. And also just going back to what we talked about at the outset of the call is use every study that you've got. I'd be happy to share our kind of learnings as well, that when your customers know that you stand for something, particularly Gen Z customers right now, they are more likely to buy from you. Buy into your brand and not just from you. And that also has long-term commercial benefits as well. So it's a healthy tension, but I think bring your teams with you. I do try to say to the team a lot, you got to keep working on the internal as much as the external engagement as well.
Brilliant, Jesse. Thank you, and thank you all. I mean, what a rich conversation this has been, rich and uplifting. I have found. Before we close, I'd just love one final thought from each of you, preferably in a sentence or something very short. What are you leaving this conversation with, Sarah?
Oof. Uh, what am I leaving this conversation with? Yeah, I mean, I feel incredibly energized. I really appreciate the questions. I really appreciate Kate, Jesse, Tom. This has been just, lovely to be in communication with all of you. Yeah, I mean, this is more than a sentence, very briefly. I have been speaking with different audiences all over the world for a while now in this space. And what is true everywhere that I go is that folks are looking for essentially two things. They're looking for that sense of community. They want to be sort of validated that this is all happening. You see this, right? And they want action. They want to know, what do I do? What is my one thing I can do? And again, the B Corp community isn't the answer to everything, but it is one answer. So just really happy to be here with you all, and thank you.
Great, thank you. Jesse, you're still off mute, so you can go next.
Okay. I'm really feeling with that sense of the the B Corp is more than just claims and certification. It really is a movement. And that movement, we need to turn up and really be thoughtful about what we consistently choose to do and what we commit to. So consistency, commitment, and the collective, I think.
Brilliant. And Kate.
Yeah, I think my kind of closing thought is that I think if you're here, then you are playing this game on hard mode by choice. And the role of collective action is that we need to move to a place where that's just the norm. It's no longer playing the game on hard mode. The playing field has actually leveled up so that now everybody's on that same space, so that you're not having to make those individual tough trade-offs and have to fight every fight along the way because the entire paradigm has shifted. And so it's why I would push to say, like, think beyond the individual decisions you're making as a business to how are we collectively changing systems, changing policy, changing regulation so that the way that you want to operate becomes the norm. You are building the world as you want it to be within the world as it is today.
Thank you all so much for sharing your time and your experience and your wisdom with us today. This conversation is going to stick with me for a long time, I think. What strikes me and what I hope strikes everyone else is that these challenges, this kind of game on hard mode, is something we're playing together. The pressure is shared, and so is the commitment, and so are the responsibilities. And B Corp is, and for me, always has been about leadership at a time when the world really does need it most. So we'll be sharing, as I said, the recording of this session with everyone who's registered, and we'll put together a little written summary of the key themes. So watch out on our channels. And if today sparked something you want to explore further and you want to discuss, then reach out. You can find us at greenheartbusiness.com or connect with us on LinkedIn. But thank you all so much for being here. Take care of yourselves and each other, and we'll see you soon.